and that was a very traumatic, dude. And I was fat, man. It was so gross. I mean, I know you think it like not a big deal, but like, dude, I was so fat. I was greasy. So we crawled through the garbage chute, and I ate some stuff. I don't even know what it was. It was probably not edible, and a lot of it, right? Not a small amount.
Welcome to How I Embraced the Suck, a podcast where you get to hear from veterans what life in the military is really like. I am your host, Walt, and before we start, you should know that I do not censor the show in any way. You have been warned.
You don't want to talk about it. You know?
Yeah.
And they certainly don't want to talk about it if it's being recorded.
Right, right.
You know, if it's heavy and recorded with the intent to be distributed, right? And
to whoever.
And if it's heavy enough, they could break down. You know, they could have an episode right here on your show.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I wouldn't.
That's my secret goal is to someday get someone to cry. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That's dirty, bro.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, here we are with Q the abolitionist. Former sailor, and to address the elephant in the room, he chose his name before that letter became popular.
Dude, I didn't. I get so much blowback on that. Yeah. I'm constantly like, why did I do that? And it's an initial, right? It's in my name.
Yeah.
Like Q is a letter in my name. So and before the whole QAnon thing, it was like, well, here's an off the wall letter that nobody uses. This could be fun, you know?
Right.
So I used it, and now it's that's part of my online persona. And you get a lot of these people who think I'm just a QAnon guy, and I spend so much time. Well, not so much anymore, but there for a while, I was like, I'm not into that. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm down with. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the assumptions are amazing, though. Yeah.
Cool. What? I don't think I've ever asked. What's the meaning behind the abolitionist part? I can guess, but
it goes back to slavery, right? You know, the abolitionist movement in the American slave history, and then it's a nod to us all being slaves to the state through the income tax and property tax and just the government ownership of us through public education and services and all this other stuff. So being kind of like a voluntarist, it's just another way of saying I'm an abolitionist or I'm a voluntarist. You know, I believe in the abolition of the state. So does that answer it?
Yeah. Right to it.
Yeah.
Cool. So you were in the Navy. What's kind of the overall background of what you did?
I was a damage controlman, which if anybody, so that's like they got me when I was 18, 19 years old with, being a firefighter. So, damage controlman on a ship, they deal with the ship's firefighting systems, both installed and portable, the damage control systems. So when I was being recruited, I thought I was going to be a firefighter. So that was really cool because that's a fun job. But then you realize, they get you with this whole, like, there's not a bigger risk for a ship at sea than a fire, but also that almost never happens, right? Ships don't catch fire, and by design, for good reason.
Sure.
So we spend a lot of time doing handyman stuff, fixing things, which is fine. I mean, it's an honest living, I guess. You got to fix the ship, keep it running, but
sure,
it's a lot less cool than being a firefighter, So
right.
that's what I did, and I had a lot of fun with it. The training was a lot of fun. Going into burning compartments and going into flooded compartments, and the training side of it was a lot more fun than the actual job. But I think that's probably normal for a lot of these positions in the military.
Yeah, especially military, because you're training for the worst case scenario in pretty much every, maybe not a cook or something, but pretty much every role. And so your training is always going to be at 10 plus,
Yeah. And
So-
it was the schools to become, a damage controlman, a shipboard firefighter, chemical, biological, radiological warfare defense. That was a blast. The schools were off the hook. A lot of fun.
Sure.
Learned a lot of stuff, and I learned frankly that I could handle a lot of pressure. Now, granted, it's training, so you always kind of have in the back of your mind this isn't all the way real, but it sure feels real when it's burning. It sure feels real when you're testing something that turns out to be a V nerve agent, and it's a real V nerve agent. And you've got to hold your gear on and not freak out that you're like, this could kill me and everybody in the room.
Right.
So there's a it's fun. So
you were a surface fleet, right?
I was a surface sailor.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on two different ships. One was a supply ship, and one was a cruiser. The supply ship was up out of Bremerton, Washington. That was a lot of fun.
Okay.
And then the cruiser was in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was less fun.
Cruiser. Let me guess. Or that's a little bigger than a destroyer, correct?
Isn't it?
I'm just thinking.
Yep. Longer and taller.
Okay. Yeah.
But not as wide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least I don't know. Maybe it doesn't look as wide because it's longer and taller. Maybe that's it.
Right.
So
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. And so in that a Navy deployment, like when people think of deployment, they're like, oh, you're out in the sand and everything. Obviously, as a Navy, you're not.
Right.
What were your deployments? Was it just ocean?
Yeah, a lot of sea time, of course. I did 4 Western Pacific deployments. The first one I did was in 98 and 99, pre September 11th, of course. So that deployment was a lot different than the other 3. So I did that one.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a whole different game, and that was Western Pacific. So we did, a lot of port visits in, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, Australia, Samoa, and then of course the Gulf. We were in the Persian Gulf quite a bit. So Jebel Ali, Dubai, the Kingdom of Bahrain, Muscat, Oman, and so our deployments were floating around, right? And that was one when my first ship was on that oiler or that supply ship out of Bremerton, Washington, and so we pulled in a lot because our mission was to refuel the fleet. Right, so we would deploy with a battle group,
right,
and that battle group would consist of an aircraft carrier, several strike platform ships like cruisers and destroyers, and then and frigates at the time. They don't. I don't think we don't have any frigates anymore. They've all been decommissioned. But our mission was to make sure everybody had enough fuel to complete their mission. So we were in and out of port more than anybody else because we would go in, gas up, and come back out. And meet everybody.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So you didn't carry enough. You didn't have enough for the whole, or even the whole voyage. You'd stop in for. Okay.
We carried over 8 million gallons of fuel.
Whew.
Wow. And when I first heard that number, I thought they were joking with me, right? But that was all cargo fuel, right? So, so we had to keep our cargo tanks full so that we could, do what's called underway replenishment or UNREP for short.
Right.
And you've seen pictures. You could Google this stuff. None of this stuff is like any kind of crazy. You just pulled these two ships pull up alongside. They shoot lines across from each other, from one ship to another, and they pull the hose across. And they pull it across. They hook it up. And they start pumping. And we would pump to them, and we would have 2 ships, one on each side. Oftentimes, we're stuck in the middle. We got 1 ship on each side, and
right.
I operated. I was because I was a firefighter, a damage controlman. I did a lot of crash and salvage support for the helicopters. We had helicopters embarked to do what's called vertical replenishment. So
a
lot of stuff would just get airlifted over from one ship to another.
Sure.
And so I'd be out on the flight deck looking out, and you would see ships lined up.
Right.
Out to the horizon, just waiting for their turn to come alongside the floating 7-Eleven.
Wow.
And so that's what we did. And that was the benefit or the cool thing about being on a supply ship is the wartime mission and the peacetime mission is the same.
Sure.
So that's what we did. And it was, I got to see all different kinds of ships, and sometimes foreign vessels would come alongside, and that was always interesting.
Oh yeah.
Because you have to try and communicate, these, you know. Yeah, thankfully, I
Right.
didn't have to worry about that too much. I was just a guy on the flight deck making sure that the helicopters didn't burn up.
Right.
know.
Right.
So, yeah,
Huh.
it was kind of fun.
So like you'd refuel the carriers with aviation fuel, right? I mean, obviously they didn't need.
Yeah,
they
they
didn't
had
need
jet. They had jet,
Yeah.
and this was back when we still had a couple conventional aircraft carriers in the late
okay.
90s. So thankfully, the one that we deployed with in '98 was a nuclear powered vessel, so we only had to worry about giving them their jet fuel. But the conventional carriers had to get gassed up every 3 days. So
Oh wow. Okay.
that, those steam boilers would just or those conventional boilers would just eat gas.
Yeah.
Just
I
eat
bet.
it up, and it was and so the guys that had been on deployments with those, it's funny, the niche, there aren't any supply ships in the Navy anymore. They're all
really?
part of what's called the Military Sealift Command. They're
Okay.
so they've taken U.S. Navy sailors off, and they've put civilian merchant mariners on there.
Right.
But back in the late 90s, and I'm sure before that, it was a real niche thing. Like, some guys would get on these oilers or these supply ships, and that's all they would do. They wouldn't ever go on a shooter. They wouldn't ever go on a flat top.
Right.
They would just stay on this class of ship, and they just loved it. And it's a lot of fun for some people because, like I said, your peacetime mission and your wartime mission is identical.
Right.
And you're always doing something. Underway replenishment is a busy kind of thing.
Right.
So being out at sea can be very boring, but this breaks up in the monotony.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
a lot of guys like that, and I could see that. So, but the ones who had done previous deployments with conventional carriers said it was just like you were tethered to that thing. That bird farm, you just follow it around everywhere it went because it always needed gas.
Right.
And, and since there aren't a lot of ports that can handle a ship like that, the Liberty ports weren't great. You didn't get to pull in very often, So, yeah, and that's what sailors go to, and that's why I joined the Navy. That's what a lot of guys do when they join the Navy. Is they join the Navy for
to see the world.
To see the world, man.
Yeah,
and you see a lot of water, but if you're a fleet sailor, I think if you're like in the surface fleet, that's probably the best way to see the world because
sure
those. I mean, now granted, this is in the day of COVID. I don't know what those guys are doing. Right. I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
What their port visits are like, or if they even get them anymore.
Right.
And certainly the 98, 99 deployment was a lot different than the other 3 deployments after September 11th. So
right. Sure.
Things have changed and they continue to change. So, but it was a good way to see the world, at least when I was in.
Mm-hmm. What was the what were some of the differences between in environment, in like working environment and your day-to-day interaction with people between the oiler or the supply ship and the cruiser?
Okay. So the supply ship was relatively new, and so it was in pretty good repair. The cruiser I was on, so between those two ships, I did what's called a shore duty assignment as a Navy recruiter. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But
yeah,
so there's 4 years, a period of 4 years between those two ships, and a lot changed because, like I said, September 11th happened, and then so the op tempo of these vessels picked up. It was a lot faster. So there wasn't a lot of time for repairs. So when I was on that cruiser, I remember I checked on board that ship while she was on deployment in 2005. I flew into Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and then took a helicopter up to the North Arabian Gulf, the NAG, up by Iraq. And so up by Iraq and Kuwait, up in north there. And it took me about a week. I was a damage controlman, like I said, and so the whole ship was kind of like, the maintenance condition of the ship, I felt like was my responsibility, not just my responsibility, but one of my responsibilities, right? So I walked around the ship for about a week with, clipboard, notepad, flashlight, because I would do it at night when nobody else was around. And I'm just looking at things, looking at the damage control condition of the ship. And it was in rough shape, dude.
Yeah.
I remember just within a week just going, this thing's just asking for it. It's like I'm looking at nothing. I felt like we wouldn't be able to withstand significant battle damage, and be able to be able to continue the mission. Just looking around and seeing things and just the way things worked. It wasn't like nothing worked the way it was supposed to. It all worked kind of like it was all jerry rigged,
right?
And that's a result of just not having good maintenance. Now, the Navy was also at the time transitioning away from sailors doing their own maintenance. So they would have contractors doing the maintenance.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
So there's a lot of stuff that never got done, and because I was on what was considered a shooter, right, a cruiser, destroyer, strike platform vessels.
Mm-hmm.
The mission of the ship is different, right? The mission of the ship, like before, I was on that supply ship that carried 8 million gallons of fuel.
Right.
So everybody took damage control very seriously, because if there was a fire on that ship, you had to put it out immediately.
Right.
Like yesterday, like never have one, But on the shooter, they didn't care about damage control, man. They it was a strike platform.
Right.
Do the missiles work? Do the guns work? Does the radar work? And all that makes sense, of course, because that's the mission of the vessel.
Right.
But if you can't withstand battle damage,
right,
you're going to be out of the fight pretty quick.
Yeah.
So it was. Excuse me. So you asked about what the people were like, or what the interactions were like. It was like going from a first class citizen to a second class citizen, like immediately.
In terms of value.
Yeah, in terms of value to the ship and the crew.
Yeah.
And which was hard for me, because I had just, I was senior now. I had done a junior enlisted tour on the first ship I was on. Then I went to become I was a scumbag recruiter for a few years. And then in the time to go to this next ship, I went to a couple senior classes, got my senior enlisted damage control class under my belt, got the shipboard chemical warfare specialist under my belt. And so I'm going into the ship going, okay, I got some skills that these guys need. Dude, nobody cared. It was weird. It was so weird.
Right.
Yeah. And it was like, and I was an E6 first class, which, it certainly is not like the most senior enlisted guy in the world, but
right.
It's not the most junior.
You've been around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to have that, it was just really weird, man. It didn't jive well with me.
Right. Right. If you were a E3 missile man, you feel like you'd be getting more respect.
Yeah, dude. Huh. Yeah, those fire control guys. Those I used to call them the combat sisters, because they're combat systems, right? And I just refer to them as combat sisters,
right?
And I wasn't alone. I didn't make that up, but that was kind of one of those funny things. I was what would be called I was an engineer, and not to say that I was an engineer, because there's a difference between being a real engineer with an engineering degree,
sure,
and being in the engineering department on a ship, which is what I was. Yeah,
a lowercase engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, yeah. And so it was like the guys, we always, the engineers, we were the most disgruntled, the hardest working, the most pissed off guys on the ship, and all the time. And we kind of took pride in that. And that was kind of
the most underappreciated.
And the most underappreciated. Yeah. Shut up and push. Just keep the lights on. Nobody needs to tell you what you're doing.
Right.
For instance, I woke up one day on my last deployment, actually, and sometime in the night we had launched 17 Tomahawk missiles into Yemen, and I didn't know that was going to happen. That wasn't, I didn't get that brief. You know what I mean?
Right.
But shut up and push. We don't care. You don't need to know everything. So yeah, that's and then so that was what it was like. The difference between the two vessels. Yeah, I don't know, man. What else do you want to
know? Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the recruiter aspect. So that was a whole 4 years of recruiting?
Yeah, dude.
If I remember correctly, you were able to be in your hometown, right? For that time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that at the time, and in hindsight, which may be different answers, was that advantageous or not?
Well, so they had a home area recruiting program.
Mm-hmm.
When for first term sailors, right? So my first 4 years I was on that ship up in Bremerton, Washington.
Yeah.
And they came out with this program shortly before I was due to get out. I was going to get out after 4 years, like most guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Hey, we'll send you home to your home area. We'll waive one year of sea time, and you can go be a recruiter in your hometown." And so I said, "Yeah, dude, I'll do that." You know,
Right.
because that'll be.
Gotcha.
And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, this will be an easy transition. I'll do a few years as a recruiter, and then I'll just get out of the Navy right there at home. You know,
Right.
I'll be home already.
Yep.
It'll be easy transition.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe spend some time networking, getting a good job lined up, and then going.
Right.
Well, it doesn't work out like that, right? So it was a good idea in theory, right? But in practice, it was a mess.
Sure.
Because, you know, I had to be a recruiter, man. You know, and
Right.
that's a rough job. You know, there's some people that really like it, and some people, and I'm one of those that didn't. And I didn't like who I had to be. I didn't like, you know, the things I had to do. You know, at some point you realize that these are people, right? And of course, you know, they're people,
right?
But you have to treat them like cattle. You know, you're moving them in, moving them out, putting your brand on them, sending them on the way.
Sure.
You know, and you know, these are human beings, you know, with lives who are making very important decisions, and your job is to speed that process up. You know,
right. Right.
And
you're not in a position to say, take your time and think about this big life decision.
No, it's and so, you know, you get in there and you're talking to mom and dad, and you know, this is talking about a 17-year-old kid who's got his whole life ahead of him,
right?
Or she,
right.
You know, or her, right? You know,
right.
And you just need to get that kid into boot camp.
Yeah,
you don't even care. You don't even care. Just get to boot camp.
Right.
Just go. And so, you know, most recruiters, you'll sit back and you'll say, "I never lied to anybody," and that's true, right? But there's certain things I didn't tell everything. You know, I didn't tell them the whole truth.
Sure.
You know, and you know, that was a very traumatic, dude. And I was fat, man. It was so gross. I mean, I know you think it like not a big deal, but like,
right,
dude, I was so fat. I was greasy. I was like windshield time, driving all over town, driving all over the county, eating fast food.
Yep.
You know, and the worst part about all of this, right? Like, I have 2 daughters, and they were both born when I was recruiting. You know,
okay,
and you know, so it was great for the grandparents, my parents and my wife's parents,
right,
and my brother and her sister, and everybody was around for their little, you know, for little babies and all that. And it was great, but I was miserable, man. And like that time of your life is supposed to, if you're a dad, right, that's supposed to be a really cool time,
right?
You know,
right.
I was grumpy, pissed off, like just angry, and mostly because it was just like I felt shame, like deep shame for what I had to do for a living, you know. And plus, now I was doing it at home, you know, around people who know me, like, and know my family.
Oh, I see.
You know, and you know what I mean? Like, I was at home. I was in the town I grew up in, and talking to people, and like my friends' little brothers and sisters, and their parents are like, "Dude, I didn't know you were," you know, I was like way like used car salesman.
Right,
like,
right.
Like,
you would have preferred to be 3 states over.
I would have rather have just been in Massachusetts or something, man. You know, somewhere else. You know.
Yeah. Kind of like not to knock it necessarily, but I mean, there's a bunch of viewpoints. But kind of like an MLM marketer, where you're utilizing friendships and relationships specifically in order to attain a goal that doesn't affect your friends.
And it was like, and the Navy, I say the Navy, but it's, you know, I mean, we're, you know, the sailors are the Navy, but you know, the leadership really tapped into that with me. And you know, they would have somebody that they couldn't get a hold of or whatever, and so they would call me up and be like, "Hey, do you know this name?" And like an idiot, I'd be like, "Yeah, I know that name. I went to high school with his brother."
Right.
Here.
He's your Mark.
Go get him.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, shoot, man. And you're just stupid after, because after a while you
Right.
realize, okay, I know the answer to this question. Nah, I never heard of that guy.
Right.
I don't even
Right.
know that guy. I don't even know. And no, it was rough, man. It was a bad tour. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I mean, I don't know. You just feel greasy. And I mean, that you can sit back and you can say, well, we need recruiters, but the answer, the question should be, do we really need recruiters? Do we really need to load up our military as big as it is, and with all the bodies? And I mean, how many Nimitz aircraft carriers do we need to defend this place?
Yeah,
How
those things. How many
Yeah.
people are on a Nimitz?
That's like
It's a city.
6,000 or something.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
Yeah. You just go, do we really need that? Really?
Yeah.
We have the biggest military budget in the world by no small margin. Do we really need that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, so at that time, well, okay. I got a lot of thoughts here. Maybe I'll make some notes. Remind myself. At that time, were you still like, you stayed in? Were you still excited about being in the military and just the military in general?
Nah.
Okay.
What had happened? So this is the trap, right? So, I did my first tour, which was kind of fun because it was new and exciting, right?
Yeah.
And I was young, and I got married, and married my high school sweetheart. We're still married, so that's weird.
Yeah.
A lot of people that doesn't happen. So 24 years later, we're still married. We've got 3 kids now. Our 2 daughters that were born when I was a recruiter, and our son who's 10 years old now. So,
Did you make it past? Were you past E2 before you got married?
Bro, I got married as an E2.
Oh yeah,
I was on the dot.
Stereotypical, man.
Oh yeah, for real. And so E2,
That's
I was making like $800 a month, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, if I get married, I'll get an extra $500 so I can afford to get an apartment.
Oh,
this is
right.
Back in '97 or whatever, right?
Yep.
So
and won't have to live in the barracks either.
Yeah, and so well, it was worse than barracks. We had to live on the ship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm living in a berthing compartment that I share with 60 other guys, and in racks that are 3 stories high and whatnot, right? So, so we, so I ended up getting married, and and it was good. I married my high school sweetheart, and we're different than other couples. I'm a Christian, and our marriage is legitimately founded on Christ, right? So, we don't have a lot of the problems that other young couples would have. We didn't have those because we weren't doing some of the things that other young couples were doing.
Right.
But it was still challenging, man. I mean, to be 20 years old and getting married, to a 19-year-old, neither
and
one of us
gone for,
and then we moved, right? Like we got married in the Sacramento area where I'm from, and we moved promptly right back up to Washington. I got in that '88 Camaro, and we drove up I-5, and 14 hours later, we're pulling into the parking lot of our apartment. That our little 1-bedroom apartment up in Bremerton, Washington, and that was life, man. And it was like, okay, I guess we're adult now. I mean, we'll figure it out. But so
I sidetracked you. You were talking about being in and the progression kind of your thought. In the military.
So.
You're saying the first deployment was new and it was fun.
Oh yeah,
and enjoyable. Yeah. Sorry.
So it was fun and unique because I hadn't done it before. A lot of travel, which is what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And then they hooked me with this trick to go recruiting, which I fell for. And so I did that for 4 years. And now I made rate. So I went from E1 to E6 in a matter of 5 years.
Right.
So I was about to go back to the fleet as a senior first-class petty officer, ready to be a chief, which is an E7, right? With a recruiting tour under my belt that was reasonably successful. I wasn't world-changing or anything like that, but it was. I mean, it was I guess world-changing for the people I recruited, but like
good numbers on paper.
Yeah, and that's another dirty thing you don't feel good about, but it is what it is, and so so I'm going back to the fleet. I'm going to be a chief soon. And that's when life is good, man. You put those anchors on, you're a chief petty officer, and you get to, walk around drinking coffee and doing nothing.
Right. Right.
or so you think, right? So, but then you get out to the fleet and you find out someone it is. So I don't know. I probably should have got out of the Navy after 4 years,
Mm. Yeah.
but then I get back to the fleet for the second tour, and I've already been in 8 years. And I've got exactly 3.5 years sea time because I spent so much time, recruiting. So that was a challenge
Mm-hmm.
to be kind of taken seriously as a leader at sea with so little sea time. And so I had to work through that, which added to some frustration. And I did 3 deployments on that ship, almost back to back to back because of the operational tempo of the global war on terror.
Right. Sure.
So that was I when I first got to the ship and then looked around and saw how bad it was and how bad shape it was, and then the challenge of even being a damage controlman on that shooter on that cruiser I was on. It was I was like, well, I shouldn't have done this. And so I did 13 years and got out, man. A lot of guys will say, oh, why didn't you stay for 20? And it was because by the time I got to my 13-year mark, the last 6 years maybe 7 years were just miserable. And I couldn't see myself doing another 7 years.
Yeah.
And I wasn't changing. The Navy was changing. I could already see at the time the kind of the social engineering that was going on with.
Sure.
Well, we'll just leave it there, right? A
Yeah,
lot of the social engineering and things were changing in how we treated people, for better or worse, right? So like the important thing was to make sure it was a kinder and gentler Navy, which on paper sounds like a good idea, but when you have people that don't know what they're doing,
right,
they're not being trained. The training was falling apart, the structure was falling apart, the discipline was falling apart.
Yeah.
And I was not changing with it. So it was quickly becoming clear that I was not welcome in this new Navy anymore.
Sure.
And I didn't exactly enjoy my time there anyway. So we got out. Got done.
Huh.
So it was interesting. Yeah. And that was a shocker for a lot of people, 13 and a half years to walk away.
Right. Yeah, it definitely. I mean, if, like you say, 20 years,
it's a hard
people not in it. They see, they're like, it's just 7 more, but you're like, well, it's gotten tougher for me,
progressively worse, right?
And
and I would say that if you were to probably figure out a way to do an objective poll, and it's hard to do this, but if you figured out how to do an objective poll, you would see that probably the Navy is much worse now than it was even back then. I got out in 2010.
Sure. Yeah.
It's now 2022 almost, right?
Yeah.
Well, probably by the time you release this.
Yeah.
So the 12 years since I got out, I'm sure progressively worse than it was even then. And even when I was brand new, the old timers would say, "Oh, it's nothing like it used to be." So it's a continuing thing. And I don't think the Navy's alone in this. I think all the branches are doing this. And if you look at society in general, we are all doing this. It's all going in a specific direction. And those of us with certain opinions about how life should be aren't liking what we see.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah. The military, I'm sure, is the military is just a microcosm of all of that anyway. So,
Yeah, definitely. The whole question, what leads what, is kind of irrelevant. They're definitely, one reflects the other.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. So that was it, man. That so that was the that's been my progression, is how I viewed the military, or how I viewed the Navy when I was in.
Sure.
So
did you? I mean, if you're on a ship for that long, did you make any friendships that have lasted? Obviously, when you're working with folks every day, there'll be like acquaintances or whatever, or you may even make friends. But did you have lasting relationships?
I probably have 2 really good friends that I've stayed in contact with. Can you hear my dog barking?
A little bit.
Okay.
It is what it is.
I can do about that, yeah. So to answer your question though, I've probably got 2 guys that I keep in touch with. One of them was my boss on my first ship, and one of them is another one was one of my sailors that I was responsible for on my second ship. And
okay. So you kind of the progression of the relationship, like you
Yeah.
kept in touch with your boss,
Yeah.
and then that's cool. Yeah.
And so I've kept in touch with both of those guys over time. One of the things that really bothered me on that first ship was I checked on board right after they came back from a deployment. So when I checked on board April 1997, and they had just come back from a deployment, the maiden deployment for that ship, and so I was hanging out with all these guys who'd already been around the world, and were telling all these sea stories, and I couldn't wait. It sounded great. And then there was a guy there that was getting out of the Navy like a month after I got there, and I struck up such a good friendship with him. And I said, man. For the sake of the conversation, let's say his name is Ryan. I don't remember what his name is, but we'll say Ryan. Man, Ryan, I'm gonna miss you so much when you're gone, dude. And it's a bummer you're not going to be here for the next deployment. And he said something that was so cold. He goes, dude, you're not even going to remember my name. I won't remember yours. And you're gonna have a million of these friendships before you get off the ship.
Right. Huh.
And it's true. I mean, it's weird now. You hear all these stories about the camaraderie and how great everything is, and all these friends and the best people in the world and everything else. And the reality is, man, you might have a couple friends that you keep in contact with the rest of your life.
Sure.
But for the most part, you're going to forget these people's names, man. They're not going to know you. You're not going to know them. If you do know them, it's because of some crazy story of something that you can't tell your grandma about.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like you wouldn't want to say it at the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yep.
Or something like that. Right.
Huh.
And, but that was weird. And I took it like the wrong way. I was like, that's jacked up, bro. I'll never, I can't believe you would say that. He's like, look, I've known you for 3 weeks.
Right.
And he left it like that. I was like, dude, that's cold. And I was, I was a kid. I was 19.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to take that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. You're fresh. Everything's new. Yeah. So you think it's always like this.
He was right. And there's a few guys that I remember, fewer that I even keep in contact with, know, and a ton of them that I probably wouldn't even be able to see, wouldn't be able to I wouldn't recognize them if I saw them on the street.
Right.
Which is, that's not the stereotype, man.
Yeah.
That's not what people like to say about the military. And to be honest, so I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
That was kind of weird, huh?
Yeah. I mean, because like you say, you hear that about the tightness of the relationships, and I think that can be true. It seems more to be true the more people had to rely on each other for their life, if that makes sense. Like people that were
You're probably right,
literally in the trenches, even if it was just for a year or two.
Yeah,
there's more of a bond. But like you're saying, if you're, but at the time you do have those friendships, like that guy said, you're going to have 1,000 or whatever of these relationships. For the moment, you do feel like you know that guy pretty well and you get along. It just when you're 70, you don't remember him.
Great example. Like when I told you I got married and we moved into this 1-bedroom apartment up in Bremerton, Washington. Well, I got this apartment with a couple of roommates before I got married, just to kind of like have a place to have it ready to go for my wife, And 2 guys I lived with, I don't remember who the heck they were. I don't remember. I don't remember their names. I don't remember their faces. I remember one of them was a gas turbine systems electrician, and the other one was an engineman.
Right.
A diesel mechanic. And because we were all engineers, we were all scumbag engineers, and so it was like these guys, and they were about my same pay grade. So that was my peer group.
Right.
But that's it, man. And I live with these guys. I've sailed with them.
Yep.
They lived in my apartment together. We lived together in the same apartment, and I don't know, man.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It is, huh? Yeah.
What's that? Early onset dementia? That's probably...
I don't know, man.
No,
Maybe. I don't know.
Oh. One thing I like to ask everybody is if a kid asked you, I'm going to join the military. What's your advice? What would your advice be to them?
The first advice would be not to.
Yeah, right.
But because I'll tell you, and it goes down to like my philosophy on things, right? Like there's something about the military that's not moral, you know. Certainly, defense is moral, you know,
Sure.
and a people can choose to defend themselves. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like you should have a strong defense, and there's nothing immoral about that. But the way we use our military as a enforcement arm of our foreign politics, it's not moral, man. You know, we you hear the cliche stuff. We kill a lot of brown people all over the world. It's true, we do. Because that's what our masters in Washington want, you know, and they use the military to do that. And I'm not a combat vet. Closest I ever came to combat was, like I said, those 17 Tomahawk missiles. I woke up one morning to find out that we launched into Yemen, Yemen.
Right.
Like, when did we go to war in Yemen?
Right.
Like that's like what's going on there. And then we even let the Yemen Air Force take credit for that. So. Okay. It's kind of one of those things. Like this is that whole like Saudi Arabia, Yemen war that they got going on there that we're helping them fight,
right.
Off the books, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so that was all part of that. So first, I would say is don't, because you're gonna have to be involved in some way, shape, or form with the enforcement of our immoral foreign policy around the world. Like that's what the military does. But if this guy's hard over and he wants to join the military, and I can't talk him out of it, I'm just going to tell him to go in with his eyes wide open, and being a former recruiter, I would tell him to make sure that everything you get, make sure you get it all in writing, all of it, everything,
like written on the back of an envelope, right?
No, like, yeah. So like,
yeah, I hear
there's and then if he changes his mind, so there's this thing in recruiting called the delayed entry program. All branches have it.
Okay.
And so it's great for kids that they're trying to get in, that are like high school seniors that can't go to boot camp yet because they got to finish their high school.
Okay.
They got to graduate, and then they go maybe sometime in the summer, maybe sometime next fall. Which is what I did. I joined the Navy in May before I graduated high school, and then I shipped off to boot camp in the next November. Right, so 6 months later.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's called the delayed entry program because they use that time to kind of like prepare you for boot camp.
Okay.
And then they tell you you're in the Navy. Like you're in the Navy. They do an oath of enlistment. They make it all make it all ceremonial and awesome, but you're not in the Navy.
Right.
Or you're not in the military, whatever branch. You're not in the military until you do that final, that oath of enlistment before you get on the plane to go to boot camp. And even then, I'm sure you could get out of it if you wanted to. So, what a lot of these guys, they'll get cold feet, or they'll change their mind, or, these are high school kids, right? And they're going to change their mind 3 or 4 or 5 times before they make up on their mind on what they want to do with their life,
Yeah.
And so I would have that problem all the time when I was a recruiter, and I would have to talk these kids out of quitting, out of dropping out. And one of the things I used to say is, well, it's too late. You're already in the Navy, because here's your signature on this piece of paper. Well, that's baloney, man. You can get out. You can get out anytime you want until you get to boot camp.
Right.
Then they own you. But, so I would tell these kids, if he was even in the delayed entry program, is I can help you get out if you want, because you're not even in.
Sure.
It's all baloney.
Sure.
It's all smoke and mirrors, and having been there and having had to do that myself, I can help somebody out with that.
Yeah.
I would give somebody every opportunity. I would try and help them not to go to the military. Not.
Yeah.
To the point where even my son, my wife and I had this conversation all the time. What if my son wanted to join the military? Like I would not want that to happen.
Right.
At all.
Right.
And not even because I fear for his life, because he could do something like me and just be a fleet sailor, and that's relatively safe compared to these guys that are in the desert, whatever, and you don't think of it in those terms, but like he's probably going to be fine physically.
Sure. Yeah.
but there's a whole lot of like extra baloney that goes along with being in the military that you just don't need in your life.
Right.
I don't know, man. That's a hard question to answer, but I would do my best to talk somebody out of it.
Yeah.
And if they were hard over and I couldn't talk them out of it, I would definitely encourage them to keep their eyes wide open, and not fall for anything, which is hard to do because it's a culture you're not used to, you're not aware of until you're there. The military is completely different,
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
They don't teach you about that in high school.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a real. It is kind of its own separate culture.
Yeah, it is.
There's just a not a, I guess maybe aloofness without the bad connotations. It's just it's there's a little distance.
Yeah.
Automatically.
Yeah. It's a lot of and the funny thing is we learn to, our sense of humor is so bad, like
right. Sure.
Vet humor is the worst.
Yep.
And it's the best, dude. Yeah. It's so awesome. But you learn to laugh at the most horrible things, because you deal with, and I'm not even talking about combat vets, right? Like, you just learn to deal with so much stupidity. And you just kind of, you have to find humor in the worst things in the world because it's a coping mechanism. And you're placed in these situations where it's just like this, it's abusive. It's an abusive environment. It's, and you have to find out how to just exist in it, and,
right.
You're standing out in the rain, sweeping water off of the ship.
Right.
You're out at sea, it's raining, and you got to get the water off the ship.
Right.
And so you just kind of do it, man. And you laugh and you find a way to, you just go, I'm an idiot. I'm just so stupid. And you're just, because you're part of this whole stupid thing, this whole stupid thing. It's, I don't know.
Now that I've heard that joke a lot about sweeping the sunshine or sweeping the rain on land. Is that actually necessary on a ship, or is that just a make work project?
So yeah, right. Who knows? So
okay.
No, but a ship at sea is kind of weird because it's made out of steel, right? And salt water is very corrosive and caustic, toxic, right? Or not toxic, but very corrosive.
Yeah.
And so the moment a ship is launched, after it's built, it slowly starts to die. And so a lot of the efforts are spent trying to keep the ship from falling apart. Like paint, if you're to paint your house,
right?
Let's give you an example. If you're to paint your house, you're going to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever hardware store. You're going to pick out a bucket of paint.
Yep.
It's a pigment change. You're changing the color of the wall, right?
Right.
But when you paint a ship, it's a preservation system, right? So you're trying to get the chlorides and the salt out of the steel and put a barrier to protect it.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So it's not just paint for the sake of paint. You're supposed to be preserving something. So there is a lot of work that goes into trying to keep a ship dry. But when it's raining,
gotcha,
it's just raining, man.
Sure.
Like, I can't keep up with this, where it's like,
I guess I could see how possibly the rain could be rinsing the salt off the.
It's even better. Yeah, you could even argue that's better.
Yeah.
Right? Let it rain. Let it wash off. Let it pull the chlorides and the salt out of this, and then wash it off. But I mean, whatever. You do that and you go, this is stupid. And there's a 100 things like that in the Navy, and I'm sure other branches it's the same.
Yeah.
And some of that I'm sure is like, some of that is just a waste of time just to keep people busy, and some of it is necessary, and some of it might have its roots in something necessary that now becomes a tactic to abuse junior sailors or people who step out of line,
Right.
So I don't know, man.
Well, I am curious because you mentioned you did the recruitment, and then now, obviously, you wish you hadn't. How have you reconciled that? I mean, it's not like you were out, shooting people, obviously.
No, yeah.
So it's definitely a different level. But now you've come to a point where you wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Well, I look at it like I'm just a different. I'm 44 years old now, right?
Okay.
I'm not 20. Like and I'm convinced that the Navy or the military in general, they recruit these people at this age for that reason, right? So you have a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid
Sure.
who's certainly strong enough to follow any order given, but not smart enough to question it.
Right.
Right. And so you go back and I realize that who is maybe it's a Jordan Peterson thing. I don't know, but he was saying something about the brain not being fully developed, and a man's brain isn't fully developed until like his mid-20s, right?
Okay.
So and then you layer that on top of the military, right? Okay. So right around my mid-20s is when I started thinking, this is stupid.
Right.
And that's when I started having my biggest issues with authority in the military. I started questioning things, and it's weird because my evaluations in the military were funny when I was in the Navy, because one year it was like, top level, early promote, great guy. We should have 1 million of these guys. They're great, and then the next cycle, it's like troublemaker, mouthy, doesn't do anything he's told, right? And then the next year was like, because it wasn't like a lack of ability for me. I had the ability to do everything that they needed me to do, and I was, I'm not an idiot, right? Like I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but I believe I'm a pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
And so I understood. I'm one of these guys that I can read something and then immediately apply it to the physical world, right? Like,
okay, sure.
Like I can understand what I'm reading and then apply it. Some people have to go through a few more hoops before that happens. I'm one of these guys. I'm fortunate in that way. I don't have to do that. And I know it sounds, I don't want it to sound bad. I'm not trying to be like arrogant or anything, like, but like, so put that together with a guy who's got to listen to the orders given to him by a double-digit IQ mouth breather. It's like, I'm not listening to you because you're an idiot, and I can tell you're an idiot. And so that becomes a problem for somebody like me, right?
Right.
And, so So I don't know why I had to say that.
Your evaluations kind of reflect
my evals were up and down every time.
Yeah.
And that's when I started having that problem, was right around 25, 26, 27 years old. After I'd been in the Navy for about 5 or 6 years, 7 years, I'm like, these are idiots. These are idiots. These are people who are just following orders. And then the officers that are in charge, they're just politicians, so they're just trying to move on into the next thing. And then these senior enlisted guys are just they're just dumb. And not all of them. And I say these with general, very general statement, right? But there's always a few that are not. But like, dude, this guy is institutionalized. He's mentally probably retarded, or maybe a little bit. I don't know if I'm allowed to use that R word on your show, but like, that's, and I'm not, and I have a problem with that.
Right.
Why should I listen to this guy?
Right.
He's going to get us all killed.
The system doesn't weed that kind of person out at a best case.
It rewards that kind of person,
someone that's just willing to stay in and keep their head down.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to excel. They just have to be there.
Just breathe, man. Just keep breathing, and you'll be fine. And then that goes to the rank structure of the military, or the Navy anyway, is like the most un-American part of it is like, this snot-nosed punk whose daddy paid for college gets to have a degree, and he's now telling me what to do. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I can help him learn, or or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It just seems it's not a meritocracy, right? It's not at all, which is not American. It's not supposed to be part of our American culture, part of American heritage. And plus, the rank structure is left over from the British Royal Navy anyway, so there's something stupid about that.
Right?
I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there now.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. No. Let it roll, baby. What did you find that, not just your experience, but also just observing? Did you find it consistent? Maybe not consistent. I guess, what was your observation of the relationship between low-ranking officers and high-ranking enlisted? Was there a lot of respect because there's the classic storyline or the image that we have of like an O2 or something asking an E7 or an E8 like, hey, how are we gonna do this? And then the E8 advises him, and then the O2 gives the orders, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and recognizing the store of knowledge in that high ranking enlisted. Was that
the good ones will, right?
Yeah, okay,
and on both sides of that equation, right?
okay,
The good senior enlisted people will take care of the junior officer, and the good junior officer will figure out he doesn't know it all,
sure,
and allow himself to be advised.
Okay.
And that's that's normal, right? That's you would do that, I think, in anything. But I think I don't know, man. But there's a lot of idiots out there, on both sides of that equation. My favorite one is when you have like a good chief or a good senior chief, which is like an E8, E9. No, I'm sorry, E7, E8, right? And a bad ensign, which is like an O1. I guess it's like a second lieutenant in the other branch.
Right,
so,
right.
A bad ensign or a bad lieutenant junior grade, which is an O2, right? And these guys are like the snotty, silver spoon
right
guys that know everything when they don't know nothing, right?
Sure,
and then you have the good chief or the good senior chief that'll be like, they'll just set them up,
right?
You know what I mean? They'll just set them up, and it's just funny to watch because you get to sit back and observe the carnage,
yeah,
or I don't know, man. And then it's no, that's a fun relationship, but that is a that rank structure is, I don't know. It seems I don't know, seems stupid,
Yeah.
But I guess you got to have it, man. When you have like just a bunch of kids that you're trying to recruit for all these ships, and then a bunch of these officers that you have to put into these positions for political reasons,
Right.
Yeah, you have to figure it out. But
yeah, I mean, if it's going to exist, there has to be some sort, but it definitely could be better.
Yeah.
Some sort of.
What did they say? There was somebody said something that the Navy is an idea that was. It's a concept that was imagined by geniuses but put in practice by idiots.
Oh, okay.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
And I don't. It is. It's like, I don't know, man. I don't know what that's got to do with anything. But
what was your favorite? What was your favorite memory or what moment stood out the most from your time in the Navy?
I don't know, man. Did I write? I got your questions here from before. Did you ask that question before?
I have not looked at that in so long that I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the funnest things, I'll tell you, WOG Day. I'll tell you. Have you ever anybody talk about WOG Day?
I was just talking to a fellow who was a merchant marine for a little while, and he had no clue what that was. I couldn't remember the name, but he had no clue. And I'm like, when you cross the equator and like there's King Neptune and all that, and he's like, I think I've heard something about that. I'm like, dude, what seaman are you? Like,
yeah, dude.
On.
When I was my first deployment, and then of course it got progressively stupider after that. That's just the way the Navy goes.
Right.
But my first deployment was not, when 98, 90, 97, 98. No, 98, 99. It doesn't matter. Anyway, late 90s.
Yeah.
So when we came back up from Australia, back up across the equator from Australia.
Okay.
We crossed the equator, and then we had WOG Day. And for anybody who's listening doesn't know what that is you have the Royal Order of the Shellback, which is functionally anybody who's not a WOG. And what a WOG is anybody who hasn't been through the initiation process to become a shellback, which is only held when you cross the equator. Right. So if you've never crossed the equator, you're a polywog. But if you've crossed the equator and gone through the initiation ceremony, you're now a loyal shellback, right? And the whole premise is King Neptune comes on the ship and he brings his, Davy Jones, who's, his enforcer,
right?
And then every shellback on the ship gets to partake in this hazing ceremony, which is amazing, which was great. Even when I was being hazed, I thought it was the funnest thing in the world.
Right.
You're crawling around on your hands and knees on a ship that's full of like non-skid. If you don't know what non-skid is, it cuts you up. It's designed so you don't slip and slide when the decks are wet, right?
It's like really good sandpaper.
it's like amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, and so you're crawling around on your hands and knees, and you do whatever you think you can do. You've got your old shower shoes wrapped around your knees to keep, you're wearing holes in your pants, your boots, are ripped up, you've got scars on your hands, you're crawling around, and they're hitting you with fire hoses called shillelaghs. They got these like cut up little pieces of fire hose, and they're smacking you with them. And you're like, I remember a week before WOG Day, they held on to like all the trash and garbage. You heard the announcement over the 1MC, right? Hold all trash and garbage on station.
Right.
And that's when, and all the shellbacks just giggled every time that happened, because that's another day's worth of trash that I'm going to have to crawl through, right? As a polywog. So we crawled through the garbage chute, and I ate some stuff. I don't even know what it was. It was probably not edible. And a lot of it, right? Not a small amount. And then you're walking around, and you're blowing the water out of the pad eyes on the deck with a straw. And they're spraying you with a fire hose while this is happening. So the water just keeps pouring into these pad eyes, and they're hitting you in the back with you got the hot sauce down the crack of your butt. And it's abuse. And it was awesome. I loved every second of it. It was great. It was terrible. And then we got to the end where I had to, when you get to the end, you're standing there with King Neptune, Davy Jones, and the Royal Baby. And the Royal Baby's the fattest guy on the ship. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but sailors are fat. Yeah. Right? Like horribly fat. Like the culture of fitness in the Navy is non-existent. Right. And they every so often they try and reinvent the Navy and say they're going to get fit, but they never do. Right. So you got these big fat guys. And so the Royal Baby was the fattest guy on the ship that they put in a diaper. Now it's just like, what is a diaper? It was probably like, I think it was like bed sheets. So they just wrapped around him, and they grease his belly up, and they put a cherry right in the middle of this belly. Right. And I had to get that cherry out of his belly button. Right. And he's got it in my head, and he's smearing it around, and it's just so gross. It's disgusting. And so I get the cherry, right. Which is like I win. But then I have to answer a bunch of these questions, to pass through my trial, basically, to see if I was good enough to be a shellback. And they had all of these lists of complaints that I had, of all the disrespect that I had given the shellbacks up to this. And these key people were logbooks from like weeks and weeks and weeks ago, maybe even months ago, of some of the stuff that I had said or done, and didn't even think about, WOG Day is coming up, they're going to get me, right? And then you just do these dumb things to get through it. And I had to, it was bad. And so finally I graduated. I guess I passed my trial, or whatever you want to call it. And I became a shellback. And so you asked the question, what's the one thing I remember the most? Hazing. Right. The hazing of WOG Day was awesome. And then shortly after that, they no more shillelaghs. And then, you're not allowed to yell at anybody, and then you can't let them. They can't crawl through trash because that's unsanitary. And then, every year, every deployment, it was just less and less cool. But I was fortunate enough to get like kind of at the end of when they could actually still beat the snot out of us, which was great.
Right. Oh, So kind of there's maybe the manufactured, I lost the phrase, but like bad circumstances. Like there's a lot of that creates that camaraderie, right? Because you went through that with people. That's what's enjoyable and sticks out.
It was fun. Yeah, it was good.
Interesting.
I enjoyed it. And what made it special was knowing even then, because they made it real clear to us like afterwards that like, hey, be careful who you tell about this, because this is the kind of stuff that they're trying to run out of the Navy. Right. If you enjoyed yourself, like, it was a good fun and welcome aboard shellback, that whole thing, like, we're happy to have you. Right. And all in good fun, all in good spirits. But, mom maybe doesn't need to know about this. Right. Because she's not going to understand, And so, and then you get into the whole, and this is going to sound like a cop out, but it seems like as the women started infiltrating the fleet more, a lot of that stuff started going away. Sure. That sounds very chauvinistic, and maybe it is, but there's a lot of that stuff that kind of, because women at sea tend to screw things up. Right. Frankly,
correlation doesn't equal causation.
Come on. But I mean, okay, whatever. Fine.
There is a correlation. Yeah. I know.
There's a correlation.
I'm joshing it.
Yeah. So, Yeah, no,
But
and a
even
lot
in
of
the
stuff
midst of
was,
that, if you'd
yeah.
pitched overboard, the dudes whipping you would have done everything to get you back on.
Oh,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
not bad feeling. It's
Mm-hmm.
entirely, and that would be different.
Yeah,
That would make it better.
it was fun.
Huh.
It was a fun thing, and shortly after that, I mean, even then, and that's what probably made it so special, was knowing that this is probably, I'm not this, because the next time I went through it, I was a shellback,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was on the other end of that, and
Right.
it just wasn't as special.
Right.
Like it had lost its luster, and maybe some of that was because I was a shellback. But you would think that, a lot of these guys, a lot of the shellbacks when I was going through it, like the older guys, they had done it 100 times. Well, not 100. That's obviously an exaggeration, but like
Sure.
they'd done it a few times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and they were just as excited as the first time they did it, or at least that's what, because it was camaraderie.
It was a tradition they were keeping
It was
alive.
a tradition that
Yeah.
they wanted to be a part of, and by the time I came around to being a shellback, it was not as cool.
Right. Right.
Well,
sailing always has been, like you read the old sailing books and how this is a line and it's not a rope, and not only that, it has its own name, and it all the particulars about how everything's got to be exactly so. A lot of oral tradition. So in order to keep that alive, rituals like that not only pass that on, but also they give spice to the whole experience.
Yeah, it was.
So they were taking pride in that.
Yeah, and a lot of that, it's so sad because a lot of that's dead. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was dead before I joined, but I was hanging on to a bit of it. But the oral tradition of seafaring men, is something that's lost, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah, that's quite a bit there. I genuinely, I do appreciate hearing someone talk about their time and just really opening up. That's a lot of what I'm trying to do with this, is just give people a view into what it's really like.
I look at
modern day, we're so distanced from the military in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So to get that kind of intimate look into someone's experience, I think is pretty valuable.
Yeah. I look at the military or the Navy in a lot of ways that maybe somebody who was in prison would look at their time in prison.
Okay. Sure. There are correlations for sure.
Yeah, there are good times.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's times that you could see and experience and go, I wouldn't have gotten that anywhere else.
Right.
But overall, it's not a good time. I would say, like you wouldn't want to go to prison just because maybe once or twice you're going to have a fun day.
Right.
Something happens that is funny or there's a good experience or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, that's a good view, a good attitude though, is even if you are in the midst of an unenjoyable or a trying time, to find the light in the dark moments, or the light moments in the dark times, I guess.
Yeah.
To try to sound all smart and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything? You got something to plug? Go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So, I have a podcast. Some of you guys might know, probably not by my listener count. It's called Unshackled Liberty, and I do this podcast with a buddy of mine, Crypto Gumbo. We're both on Twitter. You can follow me. I'm at Q_abolitionist, and then Crypto Gumbo is at Crypto Gumbo. But our podcast, we've got several episodes out, and we were doing well, releasing good episodes quite often. But recently we've fallen off, and the reason behind that is both Gumbo and I were living in Hawaii when we started the podcast, and we lived right down the street from each other, and we have been friends for a long time. We never sailed together, but we're both prior Navy, and but we've been friends for a while, and so we put this podcast together, and it's been together probably for a couple years now. But I'd say the last few months it's kind of fallen off ever since he moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and I moved to San Diego, California, and it's been very hard to keep to just kind of keep our mojo with our time differences, having that 3-hour time difference. But the podcast isn't dead. I'll say that.
Yeah.
We both want to continue putting out episodes, and we're still working on how to figure out how to get our material together where we can record again and put shows out. So if you guys were interested, you could follow us on Twitter, or you could just subscribe to Unshackled Liberty, which is basically a it's like a libertarian variety show with a like kind of a Christian spin, right? So we're both Christians, and so we try and keep things focused on that, and then look at it look at liberty from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah, your guys's your vibe, I guess, between the two of you really inspired me. Just you're so casual and relaxed, a lot of that like aloha spirit and everything.
Oh, cool, man. That's cool.
Yeah, it was just like I was like, hey, this is just two friends just sitting down talking into microphones.
Yeah.
So if anybody appreciates this show, it's partly because of Unshackled Liberty and your guys' work there. But
you're awesome for saying that, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. I've appreciated listening to what you guys put out, and I think I'm excited about you keeping on. I mean, obviously, as you know, like you're saying, that 3-hour time difference, that's tough it's hard to get a schedule.
Yeah.
That's consistent. And,
well, it's family stuff, right? He's got 2 kids. He's got twins, and they're very young. And I've got 3 kids, and we're much older than his. My youngest is 10.
Right.
And then of course I got 2 daughters who's, one's in high school, one's in college. And so in order for me, once I get my day, simmered down and I'm ready to sit down and pull up the computer and bang out a podcast episode with my boy on the East Coast, he's asleep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's bedtime already for him, so it's definitely challenging trying to figure that out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. That was
yes, sir.
That was a blast. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
All right, and we're back. And as we were chatting afterward, I was just asking Q here about we were talking over, mentioned 9/11, and I was asking him, or he was mentioning rather, where he was when that happened, and that's kind of a pivotal moment in a lot of people's lives. So go ahead and tell us about that.
So yeah, dude, I was in my office.
You recruited at the time, right?
I was a recruiter at the time. I was in my recruiting office. I had the TV. I didn't have the TV on at the time I was doing stuff, and my wife, who was working at a preschool across town because our kids hadn't been born yet, she was pregnant at the time with our oldest, and she called me up. She said, "Dude, you got to turn the TV on." So I turned it on, and I'm watching everything that everybody else is seeing. Right? It's the planes flying into the World Trade Center towers and all that coming down, and we talked about we were talking about just the things that it takes to make people okay with sending people to die. You know, and so for us as a nation, as a group of people, to see that happen, we kind of, all of us were like, we've got to go get them. We have to. We can't stand for this. This is it. And it was weird because, I'm on the West Coast. This was in the Sacramento area, my hometown area. And a couple weeks later or whatever, however long it took to start baseball back up again, I went to a San Francisco Giants game. So, anybody who's ever been to San Francisco or has heard about San Francisco, in general terms, the kind of people that are in San Francisco, And so here we are. This is all of us. It was a recruiting gimmick, I'm sure of it. And so they had us all out there in our uniforms and going to a baseball game, all sitting out there in McCovey Cove, right out in right field. And, all of us in our whites or whatever. And, and people coming up to us in San Francisco, the kinds of people you wouldn't expect, telling us, we got to go get them. We can't just stand for this. And these are like, leftist, liberal type weirdos that are like, anti-military and, certainly, and to see that kind of, I want to say false unity because I'm a little bit of a tinfoil hat guy, right?
Sure.
This is all,
maybe temporary at best.
Yeah.
It's kind of a temporary.
This is all fabricated,
feeling.
Right? The whole thing, I still believe was all fabricated, right? These people really died. This really happened.
Oh yeah.
Where planes that flew into a building. and then we can debate about whether or not jet fuel can
Right.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? That's all open for debate. But I mean, it really happened. This
Right.
event really happened, and it happened in my mind for the express purpose of what we saw.
Right.
A unified
create a
country.
reaction.
Yeah.
Sure.
Unified country for the purpose of the global war on terror, which has made a lot of people rich and a lot of people powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, man, but
Yeah.
we
Well,
were
what the connection was, we were talking about the cost of war and how it's important to realize it. And if people are aware of the cost of war, they'll be more careful in how they spend it. And also, if it is necessary to be involved in war, people are aware of the cost.
Yeah.
And then we were just talking about how 9/11 to a certain extent, regardless of cause or intent, the result was that it did kind of, at least for a short time, manufacture that drive, that national drive and need for it. I mean, I was one of those. I remember saying specifically, let's go turn that desert into glass. Or I'm sure it was tongue in cheek, but I remember saying those words, and it's just like, now I just think, man, I mean, those are just people, that desert is their farm, and
and you fell right into it. Just so did I.
Yeah.
And we were all over it, all of us. And then the national change, like we had people lining up to enlist. Like on September 10th, I couldn't find anybody who was interested, and on September 12th, it was like it was like I couldn't. I was beating them out. I was just getting rid of them. I couldn't, like, guys would show up ready to go, but he's like rolling it in a wheelchair. It's like, come on, guy. I appreciate the interest, but you can't. And then, other guys who had been already in the military, had been out for 5 years or whatever. Hey man, I'm ready to go back in. It's like, yeah, but you're still broken because you're a disabled vet,
right.
or whatever. Right? Like, it's like there's
that drive.
More interest. Yeah. There's a lot more interest, but it wasn't necessarily like, I don't know.
You were talking about when you were a recruiter, you weren't motivated to encourage kids to wait and think about it.
Yeah.
You were motivated to get them to do it now. I wonder if we as a country, politics aside and all that aside, I wonder if we as a country had time to reflect. I wonder if there would have been a different result in what people wanted. If the reaction had been slower in happening, would people have had time to sit and think about it and maybe come up with a different response? I don't know. I just popped in my head.
It's mirrored though in the coronavirus response, right? There's a mirror there. They have harnessed this thing, and whether coronavirus COVID-19 was fabricated by the government or whether it's a naturally occurring thing or whatever, however you feel on that. The government, the state has latched onto this crisis, right? And they're not wasting this crisis, and they're using it to grow power, right? So they're growing their authority, growing their strength, growing their power as a government in much the same way that the Patriot Act and everything else that came out after September 11th was used to increase the size and scope of the federal government, right? They wouldn't let us think about it. And if they would have, it would have been like, it would take a whole bunch of Ron Pauls to sit back and go, hey, there's a reason why they just flew airplanes into our buildings.
Right.
Like it's not good. Like, it's not good that they did that. And they certainly are responsible for the carnage at the individual level for the violence that they have brought to us. They're responsible for it. But, if we stop and think about this, we'll realize there's a legitimate grievance, that we're not listening to.
Sure.
And you didn't have that. You had one Ron Paul and a bunch of other idiots, running the federal government, right? Like, so, and nobody wanted that guy. Like, we didn't even know who he was back then, you know? So I don't know. Yeah. And it was George. I mean, I was a GWB guy, dude. I was, this is my guy. And I remember watching it happen and seeing Al Gore sitting in the front row of some thing that, George W. Bush was talking about something after he was talking about September 11th, right? He was giving his an address about, what we're doing now. And if the camera flashed to Al Gore, And I could just see on Al Gore's face, he was like, "Woo! Glad that ain't me, boy." You know, I feel like, but George W. Bush was the guy for that job at the time, and I'm not saying that was like good or bad or otherwise.
Sure. He fit the task.
That's his legacy now.
Yeah.
I remember him saying at that point, the focus of his entire administration is the war on terror. At that point, like right after that, he goes, "So we have changed the entire direction of the George W. Bush presidential administration.
Right.
We are now focused on the war on terror." And from that point on, we're still living through it,
Thank you for listening to this episode of How I Embraced the Suck. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend. And as my Girl Scout den mother used to say, stay frosty.
Dude, that sounds expensive, man. That sounds really expensive.